It was a quiet Sunday evening, August 15, 1971. Millions of Americans saw their television broadcasts interrupted. President Richard Nixon looked into the lens and dismantled the global financial order with a single administrative action. But amidst the technical jargon about defending the dollar, he sold the public on one specific carefully chosen word: temporary. He promised that suspending the dollar's convertibility into gold was merely a short-term measure, a shield against international speculators. 55 years later, we are still waiting for that temporary window to reopen. What was then sold as a momentary emergency brake became the permanent engine of the entire global economy. Since that night, the currency in your pocket has been floating on nothing but a government promise, a promise that was broken the very moment it was made. And that leaves us with one silent, uncomfortable question. If the foundation of our entire monetary system was built on a temporary lie, what happens when Newark? When the clock finally runs out in 1912, J.P. Morgan sat before the United States Congress. He was the most powerful banker in the world, a man who had personally bailed out the U.S. government twice. When asked to define the nature of the financial system, he did not use economic jargon. He did not talk about interest rates or GDP. He gave a testimony that was terrifying in its simplicity. He said, "Gold is money, everything else is credit." He did not say gold is better money. He said it is the only money. And that brings us to the first mechanism of the trap. The greatest trick the financial system ever pulled was not stealing your wealth directly. It was changing the dictionary. For the last 50 years, we have been conditioned to confuse two completely different things: money and currency. They look the same, they both fit in your wallet, they both have numbers on them, but mechanically they are opposites. Money by definition must be a store of value. It must be finite. It must require work to produce. When you hold gold, you are holding stored energy, the physical proof that labor was performed and cannot be diluted. It is an asset that belongs to you. Currency is different. Currency is a medium of exchange. It is elastic. It can be printed at zero cost. When you hold a dollar or a euro or a yen, you are not holding an asset. You are holding a liability. You are holding a debt note from the government that promises to pay you nothing. The system's genius was to replace the asset with the debt note, but keep calling it money. This created a psychological condition we can call fiat fetishism. We have come to worship the receipt rather than the value it represents. We work 40, 50, 60 hours a week trading our finite time, the only thing we truly own, for paper vouchers that are being printed by the trillions while we sleep. Think about the absurdity of that trade. You are trading your limited life for their unlimited paper, and because the supply of that paper is always expanding, the value of your labor is always shrinking. The system has a polite name for this. They call it inflation. They frame inflation as a natural disaster like a hurricane or a drought, something that just happens. Or worse, they frame it as growth. When the price of housing goes up, they tell you are getting richer. They call it asset appreciation. That is a lie. Your house did not get twice as good. It did not grow. A new bedroom. It is the same house with the same bricks, standing on the same dirt. The house did not go up. The currency went down. It takes twice as many units of paper to buy the same pile of bricks, because the paper has lost half its soul. When the central banks print money, they use soft, sterilized terms like quantitative easing or liquidity injection. These words are designed to sound boring. They are designed to make your eyes glaze over so you do not ask the obvious question. If I printed $1 billion in my basement, it would be called counterfeiting, and I would go to prison for devaluing the currency. When the Federal Reserve does it, it is called monetary policy, and they get a Nobel Prize. But the result is mathematically identical. Every new dollar printed is a microscopic theft from every existing dollar in your pocket. It is a tax that is never voted on, never debated, and never signed into law. It is the silent liquefaction of your savings. So J.P. Morgan was right. Gold is money because it cannot be printed by a committee. Everything else is just a credit slip for a bankrupt system. But if the system is so obviously flawed, if it relies on a math equation that guaranteed your impoverishment, why do we keep it? Why does the world continue to use a currency that is designed to fail? The answer is not ignorance. The answer is geopolitical necessity. Because to run a global empire, you do not just need an army, you need a deficit. We often hear pundits screaming that the government is mismanaging the economy. They claim that if we just elected the right people or passed the right laws, we could balance the budget and pay off the national debt. That is a comforting fairy tale. But it is mathematically impossible. The current chaos is not the result of incompetence. It is the result of a specific architectural flaw identified more than 60 years ago. In November 1960, a Belgian economist named Robert Triffin stood before Congress and delivered a warning that should have terrified them. He did not talk about politics. He talked about a paradox that now bears his name. the Triffin dilemma. His logic was cold and unbreakable. He explained that any country claiming the privilege of issuing the global reserve currency, the world's money, is forced to enter a suicide pact with its own economy. Here is the mechanism. To be the reserve currency, the US dollar must be available to everyone. It must be used by rice farmers in Vietnam, oil sheiks in Saudi Arabia, and bankers in London. The world needs dollars to trade, to save, and to settle debts. But how does the world get those dollars? The United States must send them out, and the only way to send dollars out is to buy more from the world than the world buys from you. The US must run a permanent trade deficit. It is not
a choice. It is the job description. The United States' primary export is not cars or movies or software. Its primary export is its own currency. And this creates the trap Triffin warned us about. If the
US tries to be responsible, if it balances the budget and stops printing money, the flow of dollars to the world stops, global trade freezes, liquidity dries up, the world plunges into a depression. But if the US continues to do its job, if it keeps printing and spending to supply the world with cash, it inevitably floods the market. The more dollars exist, the less they are worth. The debt pile grows until it becomes unpayable. So here is the choice. Die by deflation, a liquidity crisis, or die by inflation, a confidence crisis. There is no third option. This is why the political theater regarding the debt ceiling is so ironic. You watch politicians argue on television pretending they are trying to stop the spending. They are actors reading a script. They cannot stop the spending. If they actually reading a script, they cannot stop the spending. If they actually reading a script, they cannot stop the spending. If they actually reading a script, they cannot stop the spending. If they actually reading a script, they cannot stop the spending. If they actually reading a script, they cannot stop the spending. If they actually reading a script, they cannot stop the spending. If they actually reading a script, they cannot stop the spending. If they actually reading a script, they cannot stop the spending. If they actually reading a script, they cannot stop the spending. If they actually reading a script, they cannot stop the spending. If they actually reading a script, they cannot stop the spending. If they actually reading a script, they cannot stop the spending. If they actually reading a script, they cannot stop the spending. If they actually reading a script, they cannot stop the spending. If they actually reading a script, balance the budget, they would crash the global financial system overnight. Robert Triffin predicted that this tension would eventually break the system. He was right. It broke the gold standard in 1971, exactly as he foresaw. But instead of fixing the engine, we just removed the brakes. Since 1971, we have been running the inflation side of the dilemma at full speed. We have chosen to drown the world in dollars to keep the trade moving, sacrificing the value of the currency to save the volume of the trade. The debt, the inflation, the erosion of your purchasing power, these are not bugs in the software, they are features of the operating system. The system is designed to self-destruct. It consumes the host nation's wealth to fuel the global engine. So when you see the national debt hitting new records, do not be surprised. The machine is doing exactly what it was built to do. But if this trajectory is mathematically guaranteed, it raises a historical question. Are we the first empire to walk into this trap? Or are we just the latest in a long line of victims? To answer that, we have to look at the big cycle. There is a comforting lie that every superpower tells itself. We are different. We believe that our technology, our democracy, and our military might make us immune to the laws of history. We look back at the Romans, the Spanish, the Dutch, and the British, and we see them as primitive ancestors who failed because they were not smart enough. But if you could travel back in time to Amsterdam in 1650 or London in 1900, you would find the exact same arrogance. The Dutch guilder was once the world's reserve currency. It was considered as good as gold. Then the British pound sterling took the throne. It reigned for a century, seemingly invincible. Today the guilder is gone and the pound is just another local currency. They did not disappear because of bad luck. They disappeared because of a pattern that hedge fund manager Ray Dalio calls the big cycle. It is a civilizational clock that has been ticking for 500 years, and right now the hands are moving past midnight. Dalio breaks the life of an empire into 6 stages. In the early stages, the empire is hungry. It has low debt, hard money, and high productivity. It becomes rich by making things the world needs. But success breeds complacency. This leads to stage 4, the excess. In this stage, the empire stops making things and starts making financial products. It relies on its reputation rather than its labor. It begins to borrow massive amounts of money, not to build factories or infrastructure, but to fund overconsumption and maintain a military sprawling across the globe. Does that sound familiar? We have now entered stage 5, the decline. The defining characteristic of stage 5 is that the debt becomes so large it can no longer be paid with honest money. The government is forced to print the difference, debasing the currency to keep the illusion of solvency alive. Simultaneously, the internal fabric begins to tear. The wealth gap explodes because the printed money flows to the asset holders. While inflation crushes the working class, politics stops being a debate and becomes a tribal war. Populism rises. The center collapses. Data confirms we are deep in this territory. Look at the United States Treasury. In 2025, for the first time in history, the US government spent more on interest payments for the national debt than it spent on the entire national defense budget. Let that sink in. The greatest military superpower in human history is now spending more to pay off its bondholders than to defend its borders. This is the mathematical definition of an empire in twilight. Historically, this is the point of no return. A nation cannot project power abroad when it is technically insolvent at home. The Spanish Empire did not collapse because it ran out of silver. It collapsed because it spent more silver than it could mine. The British Empire did not fall solely because of 2 world wars. It fell because it had to borrow from the Americans to fight them, transferring the financial crown across the Atlantic. The tragedy of the American century is that it followed the exact same script. We built the greatest economic engine the world had ever seen, and then we financialized it, leveraged it, and hollowed it out. We think we are special, but gravity does not care about American exceptionalism. When you spend more than both do you earn for 50 years. The bill eventually arrives. Usually this decline is a slow, agonizing slide that takes decades. It is like a frog in boiling water. You do not notice the temperature rising until it is too late. But sometimes a specific event occurs that accelerates history, a catalyst that forces the world to stop trusting the slow decline and start looking for an immediate exit. In our timeline, that event happened in February 2022. In February 2022, the most destructive weapon used in the conflict in Eastern Europe was not a hypersonic missile or a tank division. It was a mouse click in a climate-controlled room at a central bank. With that single click, the United States and its allies froze over $300 billion of Russia's foreign exchange reserves. In an instant, half of a sovereign nation's savings simply vanished from the global ledger. To the average observer, this looked like a justified strike against an aggressor, but to the central bankers sitting in Beijing, Riyadh, and Brasilia, it looked like a death knell for the financial world. They thought they knew it was the game-over moment for global trust. For 80 years, the US dollar was marketed as a neutral utility, the global commons of finance. You were told that if you played by the rules of trade, your savings were sacrosanct. The 2022 freeze shattered that illusion. It revealed the hidden mechanism of counterparty risk that most people ignore until it is too late. You see, when a country holds reserves in dollars, they do not actually have a pile of cash in a vault. They have a digital entry in the
American banking system. They have a promise, and the message sent in 2022 was loud and clear. Your money is only yours, as long as we are happy with your foreign policy. The global financial referee has officially picked a side. There is a deep, dry irony in this maneuver. For decades, the United States maintained its hegemony because the dollar was the most trusted neutral asset on the planet. By weaponizing that neutrality to punish a rival, we effectively shot ourselves in the foot. We traded 80 years of foundational trust for a short-term tactical win. We did not just punish Russia. We issued a global warning that forced every other non-aligned nation to realize they were living in a house where the landlord could change the locks at any moment. If you are the leader of a nation with $1
trillion in US treasuries, you woke up that Monday morning and realized your national security was now a line of code that could be deleted by a clerk in Washington. The reaction was immediate, though silent. The world did not just get angry. They started looking for a shield. They needed an asset that was not a digital entry. They needed an asset that did not belong to a government. They needed an asset that has no issuer and is nobody a liability. They needed gold. Because while a central bank can freeze a bank account or delete a bond, they cannot freeze a physical bar of gold held in a private vault. Gold does not care about sanctions. Gold does not require a password. Gold does not know who the president is. This was not just a pivot in investment strategy. It was a structural retreat from a system that had become unsafe. But this raises a deeper question. If the world's most powerful institutions are quietly moving their wealth into the shadows, what do they know that the rest of us are still trying to figure out? To see the scale of this shift, we have to look at what they are doing, not what they are saying. If you watch mainstream financial news, you've likely heard the same tired script for years. Gold is a pet rock. They tell you it's a relic of the past that has no place in a modern digital portfolio because it doesn't pay a dividend. But while the media is busy devaluing gold for the public, the most sophisticated players in the world are doing the exact opposite. They are buying it with a ferocity we haven't seen in generations. In 2025, global central banks would purchase a staggering 863 net tons of gold. While this is slightly lower than the historic peaks of the previous 3 years, it remains nearly double the annual average of the last decade. They aren't just diversifying. They are building a fortress. But the real story isn't in the numbers they report, it's in the numbers they hide. An incredible 57% of that gold buying was unreported. This means a first was in profit. The 25 Plaza Accord buying was unreported. This means a massive portion of the world's physical gold is disappearing into sovereign vaults without a single press release or public filing. Why the secrecy? Because in the world of high-stakes finance, you don't broadcast your exit strategy while you're still moving through the door. You stay quiet so the price stays low while you finish your accumulation. Look at who is leading the charge. The National Bank of Poland has become the world's most aggressive buyer for 2 years straight, adding 102 tons in 2025 alone. They have publicly raised their gold target to 30% of their total reserves, when tons at why their governor did not mention returns or dividends. He cited national security. They are joined by Kazakhstan, which hit record-breaking accumulation levels, and China, which officially holds over 2,300 tons, though many analysts suspect their true unofficial holdings are significantly higher. This is the ultimate asymmetric information gap. The elite are telling you to trust the system, to stay in paper, and to believe that the dollar is invincible, yet on their own balance sheets they are trading that paper for the only asset that has survived every empire for 5,000 years. They aren't betting on a recovery, they are buying insurance against a structural failure. There is a dry irony in watching a central banker give a speech about low inflation and economic stability, while his subordinates are frantically sourcing hundreds of tons of physical gold from the London markets. They are selling you a dream of stability while they prepare for a nightmare. The lesson for the skeptical observer is simple. Stop listening to what they say on TV. Start watching where they move their capital. They are telling you that gold is a relic, but they are treating it like the ultimate reserve asset. They are telling you the system is fine, but they are buying the one thing that works when the system stops. But this isn't just about hoarding metal in a vault, it's about a fundamental shift in how value itself is being repriced. In a world that has lost its way, to understand why this pet rock is suddenly the most important asset on the planet, we have to understand the specifically psychological mechanism of the hedge against distrust. There is a common misunderstanding that gold is simply a tool to fight inflation. If you look at the data from the early 1980s, you'll see that theory fall apart when Paul Volcker raised interest rates to crush inflation. Gold prices plummeted despite the economic pain. Gold doesn't have a mechanical relationship with rising prices. It has a psychological relationship with failing institutions. The truth is much more sobering. Gold is not a hedge against inflation. It is a hedge against distrust. It is an insurance policy against the breakdown of the social contract. The moment when the people realize their government, their central bank, and their currency can no longer fulfill their promises. History shows that gold thrives most not just when growth slows, but when the belief in the system itself begins to evaporate. Think of the 1930s Great Depression. When credit collapsed and the people lost faith in the banking system, gold reaffirmed its value as the ultimate store of purchasing power. Or look at the 1970s. After the US abandoned the gold standard, gold surged from $35 to over $800 as the credibility of monetary policy disintegrated. We are not just in a cycle of high prices, we are in a cycle of disappearing trust. Today the global economy is serving a cocktail of systemic risks that we have never seen combined in a single era. We have the mountain of national debt from the 1940s, where interest payments are exploding. We have the stubborn structural inflation of the 1970s, and we have the speculative asset bubbles, reminiscent of 1929. When these three forces converge, the room for error for central banks disappears. The dry irony is that the same institutions tasked with stabilizing our world are the ones creating the very debt and deficits that erode our confidence in them. They tell you to trust the paper, while their actions buying record amounts of gold suggest they don't even trust their own math. Choosing gold in this environment isn't a bet on the price going up. It is a decision to step outside of a system that requires your constant blind faith to function. It is the only asset that doesn't need a politician's signature or a banker's permission to maintain its value. We are witnessing a fundamental repricing of trust across the global landscape. The elites understand that when the system reaches its breaking point, the only thing that matters is what you can hold in your hand that no one else can delete. But as the world moves back toward this ancient form of security, a new question arises. How does a heavy physical metal navigate a world that is becoming entirely digital and borderless? The answer lies in the fusion of the oldest money with the newest technology. For decades, the biggest argument against gold was its lack of utility in a fast-paced digital world. Critics would mock the idea of carrying heavy metal bars to buy groceries or settling international trades by flying tons of bullion across the ocean, and they were right. Gold in its raw physical form is an analog asset in a high-frequency digital era, but technology has a funny way of circling back to solve the problems it once tried to replace. We are now witnessing the rise of tokenized gold. Physical gold bars whose ownership is etched into a blockchain as digital tokens. This isn't just a new financial product. It's a software upgrade for the oldest money in history. The mechanism is a beautiful irony. We are using the most transparent, cutting-edge technology, the blockchain, to serve the most ancient and opaque asset by tokenizing gold. We've solved the problem of portability and divisibility. You can now own a fraction of a gram, move it across the globe in seconds, and verify its existence instantly through proof-of-reserve protocols that audit the vaults in real time. This market has already quietly surpassed $1 billion. It appeals to a new generation, the tech workers and the efficient DeFi architects, who distrust central banks but love the immutable logic of code. They've realized that while Bitcoin is digital gold, tokenized physical gold is a bridge between the physical reality of the earth and the efficiency of the internet. The dry irony is that the same digital revolution that was supposed to make gold obsolete is actually making it more liquid, more accessible, and more dangerous to the fiat system than ever before. Gold did not go away, it just waited for the software of the world to catch up to its hardware. We are no longer looking at a pet rock, we are looking at a more decentralized, borderless, and unprintable monetary network that has been operating for 5,000 years, now running on a 21st century operating system. But as we see the elites buying the physical bars and the technologists building the digital bridges, we are forced to confront the final reality of our journey. The patterns have been exposed, the data has been laid bare. The question is no longer what the system is doing. The question is what you will do now that you've seen behind the curtain. The shift we have investigated today is not a prediction. It is not something that is about to happen. With 863 tons of gold moved into sovereign vaults in a single year, the transition has already taken place. The decision has been made by those who operate the levers of power, while the crowd is distracted worrying if the stock market will be green or red tomorrow. The giants have already moved their capital into the only thing that cannot be printed by a committee. They are trading their promises for physical reality. They understand that we are no longer just in a financial cycle. We are in a repricing of trust. You are no longer a spectator in this story. You are living inside a system that is quietly reverting to its original settings. Gold is not a bet on the end of the world. It is a bet that the math of the last 50 years has finally reached its limit. In 1971, they told us the window was closing only temporarily. History suggests that when that window finally reopens, the world on the other side will not be the one you remember. The question is no longer whether the system will change. The question is whether you will be holding a receipt or the asset when it does. If you've recognized the pattern today, leave a 1 in the comments. Subscribe to Financial Money History. The investigation continue.